Scott, it's lovely to have you join me today. I'm super happy. So, Scott Brooker is the Enterprise Architecture Director at Premier Tech globally. Congratulations, Scott, on that
Thank you.
recent role. Today, I really want to talk about architecture, AI, and your perspective. So, Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Deidre. Thanks once again for inviting me. And a little bit about me, Scott Brooker. Yes, I work with Premier Tech here in the province of Quebec, Canada. Been with the organization for about 5 years. Prior to that, I've been working in the enterprise architecture realm, whether it's business architecture, application architecture, business analysis, what have you, for the past 26 or so years. Really looking forward to spending some time with you today.
Tell me, how did you get into? Give me a little bit of background. Tell me the story about how you ended up to where you are today. Take us
Perfect.
back a
How long do we have today? A
bit.
couple hours? Let me see here. So I started off, I was actually in the Canadian Armed Forces, working in standards and training development over the course of a couple of mandates with a couple of contracts with the Canadian Armed Forces. I moved into working with a telephone company in mergers and acquisitions. And one of my biggest projects was to merge four different telephone companies together. So started my career off in a corporate change-like role, doing analysis based on the organization, the functional roles, the types, the jobs that we do, why we do those jobs. If we don't do them, what would happen? And really started to get a better sense of how the organization ticked and what made it work, all the different roles, responsibilities, the different processes. And I just really found my niche. And over the course of many years, many different assignments offshore, so external to Canada, whether it was in Jamaica or the Philippines or India. I had an opportunity to work with a lot of different organizations in functions like business analyst, functional analyst, working with different systems. And then because I'm curious and I like to learn about why people want to do things and what the reasons are for that, it just was a really good opportunity for me to move into the IT planning, because that's what we called enterprise architecture back in the day, move into the enterprise architecture teams and really better understand how we can fill the gap between what the business is looking for and what the IT teams are trying to deliver. And I found that there was a great niche to become that translator of sorts. That's how I got started.
You're also a global traveler, so you've been all
True.
over the place.
Yeah.
So, which countries have you been to? And I believe you speak multiple languages too.
Yeah, I can do French, I can do Spanish, I can do a couple of ancient languages that are absolutely not useful anymore,
Oh,
from
really?
Latin, Greek, ancient Aramaic, but that's okay. Definitely not useful in a business context these days. But yeah, I worked in Jamaica, worked in the Philippines, worked in India, worked in Singapore, a little bit in Europe, and all across the United States and Canada.
That's awesome. So you've not only can speak multiple languages, but you've traveled the world. So that's pretty impressive. Um, So let's talk about your career a little bit, Scott. You've mentioned your progression
Hmm.
going through the change, coming from the military and now working at Premier Tech. Are there any key experiences that you went through that really changed the trajectory of your career? Are there any key things that stand out?
I guess one of the earliest memories of things that stood out was, again, when I was working in that corporate change team. Was a little bit naive in the sense that corporate change, mergers, guiding the acquisition, the alignment of different processes across organizational units. I guess I didn't realize that at the end of that mandate, the organizations were merged, business processes and the services were aligned. And there wasn't really much requirement for a corporate change team after that. So very quickly, I learned how to better understand how to get involved with the different mandates that I was doing, really seeking clarity around what the business outcomes are and what the desired deliverables are. Try to prevent those surprises of naivety. Right?
Fair enough. And so do you feel that enterprise and business architecture fill that gap?
I think they do. I think enterprise architecture, business architecture really helps to create that common perspective, that common language. In business architecture, we talk a lot about value streams and capabilities and organizations, and that's all great. But without alignment around information concepts, you end up having a bunch of people collecting a bunch of information and then trying to connect it all together, and they come at a problem from different perspectives. It's hard to calibrate if you haven't communicated, and it's hard to collaborate if you haven't calibrated. At the end of the day, communicate, then calibrate, then you can collaborate. And I think business architecture and enterprise architecture brings a common perspective and a common set of goals that help to align us.
Yeah, I love that because Roger uses connecting, correcting, and collecting the
It does.
dots.
I like using that. I use it all the time because it's basic. I have two sets of three C's that I
Mhm.
use. So communicate, to calibrate, to collaborate. And then, of course, the collect, connect, correct.
I
And
was
you
just
need to use
thinking the
both
exact
together. Yeah,
same thing. You can actually join all of those things,
sure
and
you can.
it all starts with C, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. And
I'm
it's a good
looking forward
mnemonic in
to
your head.
seeing your yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing your diagram of all of that. That's awesome. I really like that, especially the connecting with the collaboration with
Mm,
all of those components. Really important.
yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots happening in the world, right? There's
Mhm.
lots of change. There's AI. There's multiple different things occurring. Why do you feel that it is important to have enterprise architecture? Why is that embodiment of having that in the organization important? Why does it matter?
I think it's interesting because I have to answer that question a lot, whether it's from project practitioners or whether it's from directors in a particular business group or whether it's from executives that want to understand what the heck you do, Scott, and why do I need to keep investing in enterprise architecture? What value do you bring to the organization? And I think at the end of the day, we're the guardians of the institutional knowledge. And I think that really helps us to collect that information, make the connections through references. Typical enterprise architecture, we talk about repositories or workspaces or whatever the case may be, but it's creating those relationships around the different sets of knowledge that we have, and then being able to bring that forward to help the real architects of the business, the leaders and the executives that are in touch with what our customers need, in touch with what our stakeholders need, in touch with what our investors need, our partners. Those are the real folks architecting the business. They're the folks that are creating the value. We in enterprise architecture are exposing the related data sets, the related information points and perspectives to help people make better decisions. That's the value proposition, I think, of enterprise architecture.
I love it. I think we should add another C,
Okay.
curate.
Curate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's have a big circle called curate and the Roger Burleton three C's. And then we can have the Scott Brooker three
Yours is-
C's
Yes,
on
this
the
is it.
communicate, to calibrate, to collaborate. That
Yeah.
that works great.
I love your value proposition. It makes a lot of
Hmm.
sense. Often, as you know about me, I say, what's the point of building a house if you don't understand what you're building to start off with? So, having some form of architecture is really helpful. We know
Right.
that in the physical world, and so when we work in the digital world, it makes a lot of sense too. But I think digital concepts are sometimes hard to really understand. So my next question, you mentioned information
Hmm.
and information concepts. Can you explain what you mean when you say information
Sure.
concepts?
Yeah, I think information concepts are really around how we describe concepts, different points of view, different collections of information in a way that is easily understandable by everyone who has to consult those sets of information. I'll give you an example of what I've been working on with one of my business groups where that particular business group sells and provides equipment, packaging equipment to our customers. But in one of our applications, our line of business applications, we refer to those pieces of equipment as assets. Wait a minute, it's an asset. So when I think about an asset, I'm thinking about how I'm going to amortize that asset, how I'm going to derive value from that asset. I'm thinking about how I'm going to maintain that asset, how I'm going to dispose of that asset. But that's not the case. For us, this is our customer equipment. We are creating customer equipment sets, production lines essentially, and we are selling that to our customers so that they in turn can pack and whatever products that they are currently manufacturing. So when we describe customer equipment and we describe assets, customer equipment helps us to better position what it is that we're collecting in terms of information, how we're managing that information, and how that information provides the fuel, if you will, for the value proposition and the value chains that we use. So asset, I'm collecting different types of information. Customer equipment, I'm definitely creating different types of information, but then it's all the other concepts that are related to that, like a service contract. Service contract on an asset? Sure. But I wouldn't be selling a service contract. I would be subscribing or purchasing a service contract for my asset. So it just really changes the positioning and the perspective when we start talking about information concept to build a common understanding before proceeding to start modeling the rest of the business.
It's fascinating because one of the key things I've learned with AI recently, it's all about language, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And everything's about language. So what you're saying here is the language of the business really does define some of these outcomes and what we're doing. I've often said it's the dark horse of architecture. Like people overlook information concepts as to its value. And I know that you're a very strong proponent that having a good set of information and structured information is really helpful. Yeah, that's a good example. So we spoke about a project who you mentioned around information concepts, but are there any projects or initiatives where particularly enterprise or business architecture played a critical role in any of the outcomes of those projects?
I would say that at this point in our evolution, I'll use that term because of what we use internally, which is really how we grow together, right? We evolve as humans, we evolve as dancers on the dance floor, like we get better with practice. And I feel like we have really taken a step forward with being able to better define the what it is that we want to change, the why we want to change it, and the why now. And I think that those three elements, the what, the why, and the why now, really help us to better articulate the value proposition of business architecture. Because then we can start talking about the what we need to change. So we got a value proposition, we've got a value stream that may need a little bit of love because we've got some indicators where customers may be less satisfied, where we have potential revenue increase opportunities, where we've got potential some cost savings. The what is really it really helps us to frame where it is that we need to target. The why helps us to understand the motivators or the motivations or the drivers around that change. And just because I have a willingness or a desire to buy a Ferrari doesn't mean I need to buy it now. So the why now really helps me to understand why it is that I need to make that change. Is it because I've got some internal factors that are putting pressure on me? I've got some external factors like headwinds in a marketplace. And this really helps to frame the discussion, to bring people together around the change itself. Then we can start looking at creating that common language through information concepts and really trying to understand which business capabilities are in target of that change and simply go in and say, so why is it that we need to improve X, Y, or Z in terms of business capabilities? And then design some projects that are targeted towards increasing those capabilities versus projects that become orphan that aren't tied back to the business objectives.
You're absolutely correct. And I like the why now. It's often a question that isn't asked, but
Yeah.
have to be a strategic thinker to understand that it's not all about only the future.
Sure.
Uh, it it might be something you want to do, but there's also things that have to be rated in terms of
Sure.
what's relevant. So I really like that you've raised the why now, a really important thing
I
in
think it's
terms of
strategic
strategy.
thinking, Deidre, but I also think that it's managerial courage, which is a forgotten skill sometimes these days, where you have to have the courage to ask, why now? And if I didn't do it,
Mhm.
what would happen? And
Yeah,
that's not something that I think comes natively or intuitively to a lot of people. As business analysts, as project practitioners, even as business architects, sometimes we can
Mhm.
fall into that very dangerous rut of becoming an order taker when in
Mm.
fact we are custodians, so curating those information sets, but we're also responsible thought leaders that should be using our incredible human centric skills to provoke those good conversations.
100%. I agree with you on that. Um, so let's talk about the future. And like I said, the why now is probably going to be a good lead up to this question. So, what do you see happening in the next 5 to 10 years? And let's talk about AI. Let's talk about
Okay.
all the things that before our session we get excited about. But what excites you about the future? But maybe also some things we have to really take into account and be quite meaningful about. What does that look like? So, what does that look like for you? What does the next five years look like for you?
Gosh, I feel like I'm going to be very provocative in my creating this perception of what I think the future is going to be. So if I'm too provocative, you let me know. I think previously I spoke to the fact that we need to return to our back to the basic skill sets as business analysts, as humans, and as leaders. We are expected to develop a certain set of skills, like being able to thrive in a conflictual situation, to look for ways to resolve that conflict, to have managerial courage, to delegate, to have better conversations, to seek first to understand before being understood. All of these great buzzwords and leadership skill sets that we're expected to have. But I think over the last, I'd say 10, 15 years or so, we've been uber focused on generating perceived value by producing artifacts, documents, project plans, requirements lists, traceability matrix, test cases. And then what happens is we're so busy producing the artifacts that we've lost sight of the value that we should be creating for the organization by having conversations. And that I think that art of the conversation is fast becoming a lost skill that we need to come back to. So I think if I look to the future, and when I say the future, I'm talking next year, the year from now, I think it's that soon. We're going to see AI come in and really help us to populate those data sets, populate that information set, listen to us, and catalog the information in a way that is easily retrievable, creating those models for us based on the
Mhm.
information that we have. Making sure that those diagrams are done, those project plans are done, those requirement sets are done, and all that conforms with the various Bibles that we have, whether it's the IIBA with the Babok, whether it's the BizBok, and all those structured guidance sources for us. AI could do that
Mhm.
really great. But what it can't do is seek to understand better by having nuanced conversations and creating that precision of language for us. That still is the realm of what I believe are the human centric approach to using AI to accelerate.
I'd 100% agree with you. And part of those blueprints for success was
Mhm.
actually to share each other's stories because we all have very valuable perspectives. You've got 3 dots, let's say, and Roger's got another 3, and I threw one in today. And we're having to toggle between all those things. So I think what you're saying is, firstly, 100% it resonates with me that we need to look at the skill set. And when we look at that skill set, what does it mean if people don't have that skill set? Because a lot of people have relied on their career. So let's just talk strategically, right? So if you think about it, there is huge change happening in the industry. And this huge change is going to affect everybody. So if AI, as you mentioned, is starting to generate content and artifacts for us at rapid speed and with more accuracy, but people have spent all their time building these artifacts and not building those soft skills and building the reasoning and the critical thinking that's required. What does that mean? So, do they have to change the way that they learn and work? Are they at risk? Are they not at risk? These are hard questions, right?
Sure they are.
But I think people need to also be real about the understanding that when massive changes happen, they need to be learning and be ready for those things and also know what to learn. Critical skills is not always easy to learn those skills. So what are your thoughts around people? What should they focus on? What learning should they do? You mentioned the critical skills, but what should they lose and what should they gain? What are those options?
All right, so let me see if I can try to articulate this because we could talk for hours about missing skill sets and the generational skill divide. So I think what I'd like to see is a return to storytelling. I think that's an art, and I think we sometimes take an overly scientific approach to how stories are structured with the positioning and then a little bit of conflict and a little bit of resolution, and there's always a recipe. But it's
Mm,
missing that flair and it's missing that precision of language and it's missing that context. And I think that's what human beings we do so well. So I think we need to learn to tell stories. We also need to use these things much better. We need to listen as much as we speak. So I had a fortune cookie when I was 16 or 17 years old that said, "You shall listen twice as much as you speak." And I don't know if I can still find that little slip, but that always stuck with me to say, if a fortune cookie
mm,
saying that,
mm.
maybe it just might be good advice. There's some advice like my lottery numbers that haven't really proven successful, but that's
Yeah.
okay. So I think storytelling is a big one. I think it's
Mm,
that art of active listening and reflection. So this is what I heard. Did I hear correctly? That double take to make sure that we're clearly understanding each other. Because the risk is that we build that misunderstanding into our models. We build those hypotheses. We build those intuition without checking for understanding into our models. And that creates gaps, that
mm,
creates deviations from the reality. And as a result, any models that AI might produce based on imprecision of language and a data set that's missing something or an information concept that's not fully defined, that's going to create errors because AI
mm,
is only as good as the information that we're providing it.
mm.
So I think not only do we have to curate that information better, I think we have to better understand the information, and that's what human beings are able to articulate and ask those questions. But I also think that we're going to see the rise of a digital agency model using AI. So I think that's something else that I see where we're going to see AI feed other AI, and what's incumbent upon us is to ensure that AI has the right information, else it starts sharing and propagating misinformation at a much faster pace than what we can do as mere humans and mere mortals. I
Yeah.
think the onus is on us to have precision of language.
I agree with you on this one. It's quite interesting because there's two things I just want to bring out of your
Sure.
conversation. So, obviously, the skill sets and being able to clearly articulate things, and we all have different skill abilities and ways of doing that. So, that in itself is a really challenging thing to do. But secondly, if you look at prompt engineering and you look at being able to give AI a good scope of work, that is another key skill. So to be able
Sure it
to
is.
actually speak to AI, so Omar, it was one of the interviews, and he said, we need to teach people how to speak to AI, but also how to speak to people. So it was quite an interesting, when you raise this, it's quite interesting because it's almost like you've got to have a double view of communication. One is around that precise and structured and right language, and the other one is speaking to the heart of the human, right? And truly understanding. So yeah, interesting.
I think as humans, Deidre, we're very accustomed to doing that. A lot of us have pets, animals, and so we're very accustomed to giving a command-based instruction to our
Yeah.
animals where we're very precise in our language. But the day that I tell my partner to sit, come, a pot, bring, we're going
Not
to
going to
have a
work.
different conversation at the end of the day. So I think as humans, we're able to compartmentalize that provision of instruction.
Mm.
But I think it's really a skill set of knowing which skill set to apply and when and in which situations. And again, the human brain's pretty good at creating that muscle memory to help us be contextual, right? Whereas you have to provide context to AI, right?
Yeah, you absolutely do. There's just too much out there. It has to understand it, like you said, the why and the what. And I'm not sure that it needs to understand the why now, but that might be helpful too. But
Well, I've
yeah,
practiced running some prompts a little bit with the why now to provide a little context in terms of alternatives and what if scenarios. I think that's super helpful as well. So I do believe
yeah.
that AI can absolutely handle some what if and some why now or why not now,
Mm,
because both questions are equally valid.
mm, that's true. I didn't think of that. That is true. Skills, competencies, we've been talking about them. If you could choose maybe one skill and one competency, one of
Mm.
each.
Okay. For
Because we spoke
now
about
or in the future?
for the future. So let's
Mm.
talk about the 2-3 years from now,
Okay.
assuming there's going to be a lot of AI integration. And I think it's fair to say so. If we see how much has happened just in the last year and a half, and that was just the beginning, we can assume that it's just going to get more. It's
Yeah.
not, there's no rate of decline at this stage. So what two skills, well, what skill and what competency do you see?
So I definitely think that really developing a strategic thinking or a strategic mindset is important. Now, I just want to use strategic thinking with a lowercase s because a lot of persons overvalue strategy, but strategy without the ability to operationalize it is just a really good plan, but
Yeah.
without the ability to execute. And then if you have really good plans, but you don't have the strategic orientation and direction, you're just all over the place. So you
Yeah.
need to have the intersection of the two. So I'd really like to see so strategy to execution based thinking. And I'm inventing this skill right now, but I'd like to
Yeah.
see persons understand that you have to have a good plan. You have to understand why you need the plan, why now you need the plan, what are the strategic or operations business objectives that you want to achieve. But then you also have to have that critical thinking and that awareness of current landscape in order to be able to match the right projects that give you the right lift that you're expecting. And I think that's a skill set that I'd really like to see a little bit more is persons that are able to equally balance the art of the possible, the what, the why now, with the how. That's a skill
Mm-hmm.
set that I'm looking for. In terms of competency, I'm really looking for communication and collaboration competencies. Right?
Yeah.
I'm really looking for persons who can hold someone's eye, who can hold someone's attention, who knows when to speak, knows when to just. So I'd really like to see an emphasis on that collaboration piece, not necessarily being the person that makes the most noise or the most contributions during a meeting, but someone really who can take a step back, listen, and when they speak, people pay attention. So that's what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm. And that's tough. That's
It
a
is
special
tough.
skill. It is
It is tough.
it's a
Yeah.
very special skill for somebody to be able to have that listening ability, but also then the reasoning to put it all together in this big picture
Yeah.
perspective. But that's the challenge for architects, right?
Sure it is.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so That's why we
Separating
do what
clarity from ambiguity, right?
this is
And
it.
the only way to do it is to understand why it's ambiguous in the first place.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about those entering the field. So people who go, I really want to be an enterprise architect, or I want to be like Scott.
God forbid.
What what advice would you give them?
I think if you're a curious person, you're going to make a great architect. If you have a pretty strong foundation in both business and you can dabble in technology and you're not afraid of it, I think really taking the time to understand some of the core principles of business analysis, business architecture, seek to understand the fundamentals first. I think that's definitely going to be something that I would suggest persons do. A lot of persons want to rush directly to a project or want to create contributions right away. And in the end of the day, I think you need to understand concepts so that you can speak the common language with everyone. I think you also need to be really good and comfortable to network, seek out mentorship. I think that's super important. And I think at the end of the day, you need to try and be wrong and be have enough introspection that you can say, what did I miss? Why did I miss it? And how can I make sure that I have a little mental checklist so that I potentially want to circle back to those types of concepts or those types of perspectives later? I think that's going to really help.
Bringing in that thinking slowly thought. And why would you suggest, let me ask a different question. Why would you suggest this as a career versus say, oh no, I think you should do something different? Let's say somebody is a systems thinker, critical thinker who
Yeah,
understands how to connect these dots. Why would you suggest enterprise architecture? What would be the motivation?
I think if you like to see the big picture, if you like to bring the big picture down into a piece of the whole, if you feel really comfortable or you really want to have persons understand and create that clarity of intention and clarity of action, if you really find that you create value and you really get excited about having the light bulbs go off when you're speaking to people and when you're connecting to people or to other players to speak to each other. I think that's what enterprise architects do best. I think we connect people with information, we connect information with problems, we connect problems with solutions, and it's all about that art of the connection. So if you like connecting things and people and driving value by your conversations and those connections, enterprise architecture is a great fit. Sure, you got to do
Yeah.
all the technical stuff and you got to document stuff and you really have to pay attention to details. If you like all that and you enjoy the buzz that when people see eye to eye and they've agreed to move forward on a project together and they're seeking the common goal and their objectives are aligned, you've done your job as an enterprise architect. Walk away happy.
That's good. Okay, last question
Sure.
before we get some details. If you could go back in time, Scott,
Hmm.
and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
I know you've done some great things with AI, but if you built a time machine, I want a piece of that as well. Right. Let me see if I could go back to my 21-year-old self, just starting out in this world. It would be do not dampen your curiosity. It's your gift. So continue to be curious and don't allow anyone to tell you that being curious isn't a skill set. I think the second piece of advice I give myself would be if you're curious, ask. Ask. So if you see something, say something. If you say something, document it. Creating that repository, creating that information set, that's a legacy because you've had the conversation, keep a record of it. There's incredible amounts of value in documentation, and there's an incredible amount of value in sharing what you've learned. Knowledge is only powerful if you share it. So I think I'd remind myself as a young guy that if I've collected information, don't keep it for myself. share it, and you'll be much stronger and more valued by doing so.
And there's no such thing as a silly question, is there?
If you ask me my shoe size, that's something completely different. But
That's great. Scott, what are your plans in the next 2 years? Do you have any particular areas where you want to take your team, or if you can share any of that?
sure, yeah.
Or
So one of the challenges that I think a lot of organizations have is an incredible amount of talent, an incredible amount of opportunity, lots of headwinds. The economic conditions, political atmospheres are very different these days, and I think a lot of us are trying to figure out what's the best right mix for digital transformation projects. So I really feel like my team's going to spend a lot more time understanding the types of projects that we need to do, the what we need to do in terms of change, why we need to change, and why now, and to use that to frame our impact assessment on project intake at the level of the portfolio. It's going to do two things for us. One, it's going to create a common understanding of what we need to do, why we need to do it. And then two, it's going to really help us protect that limited investment that we have available. So
yeah,
how can we really make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck for the very specific investment items that we need to do? What's the right sequence we need to do to maximize that investment as well? I had a conversation with one of our finance guys last week. I won't mention what level of finance guy, but let's just say it was a finance guy. And he said, Scott, I just don't think that all solutions are digital. You're absolutely right. Sometimes there's lots of things that we need to do first before we move into a digital based solution. I think that was a really great moment of clarity for me as well that I plan on passing along to my team. Not all solutions are digital.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's true. So, if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, Scott,
Mhm.
what's the best way to do that?
So you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can always send a message to brookerjs@me.com. And it's always my pleasure to do some virtual
Mhm.
paper napkin diagramming or to have heated debates about why information concepts should be much more important than starting with capabilities or value streams. But I'm being overly provocative at the end of your session, so I won't do that.
I've loved having those conversations with you. Advise if anyone wants to have them, then Scott's a good person to
Absolutely.
have those conversations with. And yeah, so I think that's awesome. Scott, thank you so much for sharing your story and a little bit more about you. I wish you much success in your role, also in taking people on that journey and telling stories. You're a good storyteller yourself, so kudos. It's not an easy thing. Thank you for sharing with me today. I really appreciate it, and I hope those watching will appreciate those life lessons that you've shared. It's been great meeting up with you again. I really always enjoy our conversations. Uh, this short session doesn't do enough justice to the amount of wisdom in the conversations that you have, but hopefully those who see it will gain something from these sessions as well.
Well, hey, Deidre, thanks very much. Once again, I really appreciate the invite to have a conversation out in the open today. I know we do a lot of these conversations over a
Uh,
coffee or a glass of wine, and it's really important to keep those relationships alive. Thank you. And once again, if anyone wants to contact me, please feel free. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott.